I am very excited to welcome Katie to the podcast today. Katie and I have been friends since I was a freshman in college, and she was actually the resident hall director when I moved in to be a resident assistant. Today's episode is full of stories between Katie and I and our mental health journeys that went in completely different directions. They crossed paths, they differentiated, but we're going to talk all things mental health. And for this episode, I just want to remind everyone that it is the opinions of myself and Katie, and it's presented solely for informational and educational purposes. And it's not intended as any mental health care or healthcare advice. If you are resonating with anything in this episode, neither of us are healthcare or mental health care providers. So I recommend that you reach out to a mental health or healthcare professional to ask further questions. And for more information, please see our privacy policy at TURTZED.com. So Katie, I think it is safe to say that after quite some time, almost 20 years, which is wild.
Yeah.
That we have lots of stories to tell and talk about.
Just a few.
And I'm so excited that you joined us today.
I'm happy to be here.
So I guess let's start with just how would you characterize our friendship?
I think easy. I think it's just one of those friendships that we just were meant to be friends. There wasn't any big moment or anything super crazy. It just like we clicked and it worked. And we really balanced each other in a lot of ways, but also have a lot of similarities in others. So it just was easy, you know?
That is for sure. And I think back to times where we would hang out on the couch watching America's Next Top Model and chatting and laughing. And it was easy.
Yeah.
And I think that, as we'll discuss, for so many reasons, even when we've been on completely different pages, getting back into sync was easy.
Yeah, it never required work. It's always been, I think, one of the friendships that I've had that it's kind of a comfort of, I just know you're always there. You're going to be there, and that's that. And there's something very comforting about that, where there's no pressure, there's no judgment or any of that. It's just a simple, what's going on? What's happening in your world?
Yeah. It's interesting you phrased it that way, because I always think about the friendships that people talk about where a day could go by, an hour could go by, or 6 months could go by. And you just kind of pick up, like life happens.
Totally.
But the minute I hear your voice, I just snap back into, cool, okay, I got it. Catching up. Let's keep going.
No, exactly. And that's what I really appreciate about our friendship. It's never been a challenge. It's never been hard work to talk about anything and everything. I think over the years, especially as we've gotten to know ourselves better, it's also made that sharing process easy as well.
I would love you to tell your perspective of our first interaction, because I think in so many ways in that moment I was there for you, but you've been there for me in the same way.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear your version of that and how it made you feel.
Yeah. Well, so at the time I was working at the college that we attended, and I was in the residence hall that I worked and lived in. But I also was at the actual office for Res Life, and I was helping with all the room assignments and everything. And Charlie came in with one of his friends looking, oh my, so preppy. Popped collar, hat to the side a little bit. Very nice watch, I will say. It was a really good look. But I immediately was like, whoa, he's a bro. And what's so funny now, looking back on that, like, could not have been more wrong in that moment. But I will never forget that you were trying to help your friend who was like upset about her roommate assignment, and it was a whole thing.
First impressions are not everything, and Katie will prove that today. Yeah.
Thank God for that. But I think the first like real interaction that mattered and was lasting was you were put on my staff. We were doing like a little, team building kind of moment. We were going bowling, I think. And I think I was driving the car, or you were driving.
Yep. And I was new to your team where everyone else had already been with you.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody else kind of knew me and had experiences with me, had been working with me for at least 6 months. And what they all knew was I had been going through this like very long-term relationship. And what they didn't know is that that relationship had ended over the holiday break. 6-year relationship, just like donezo. And we were sitting in the car and they were asking all these questions and it was becoming like an interrogation almost. And I was doing everything I could to like dodge and weave to not have like a full on meltdown and because it was still very fresh. And Charlie just swooped in and was like, "Yep, so who's playing on teams? What's happening? Like who's doing what? Are we competing?" And just completely shifted the conversation away from everything to do with that. And we had just really like met properly. But it's like you knew that I was floundering and like I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I didn't want these people that work for me to see me have a complete and utter meltdown. But that's very much what was on the way because it was so fresh.
It was actually a split second where I realized what was happening. And we had just gotten in the car. People were putting on seatbelts, getting ready, getting into the back, whatever it was. And I actually think it was when I turned around to go reverse, I had looked at your face and I could just tell that there was something wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I didn't know you. You could have just been staring straight forward.
Yeah.
And we had met that day. That was the first day of orientation. So, but I just could feel almost the energy and the look on your face. And as I turned around, I just went into exactly the dialogue you discussed. And I think what is so interesting is that that's kind of been the dynamic of our friendship since day one.
Yeah.
As we have gone through our friendship, you and I have had many hard conversations.
Definitely.
And I want to preface that because as we go through our conversation today, I think to an outsider, it may seem harsh or it may seem abrupt. And I think what is so powerful about the conversation we're going to have is that we've gone through really hard times together. And we've also learned a lot when we were struggling, both individually and as friends. And I think something we both have experience with is being there for each other, but also moments where we didn't know how to be there for each other when we may have needed to.
Yeah, 1,000%.
Regardless of what we've gone through, we've always been there for each other.
Yeah.
So I want to go back about 5 years ago when we were in a position where our friendship wasn't as strong as it was. And we got to a place where neither of us knew really how to ask a hard question and say, do you need help?
Yep.
And we could each see it in each other, but we couldn't see it in ourselves. And it was happening at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I remember calling you and saying that I was feeling hurt because you had just had your daughter and it was your first child. And I know how difficult that can be. And I was reaching out to ask you, how are you doing? Do you need anything? Just saying hi, because in those first couple of weeks, it can be isolating and overwhelming to say the least. Mm-hmm. In that conversation, I basically said, I can't do this anymore because I keep reaching out and you're not responding. And I'm curious how that made you feel in that moment, because it was not me asking you, are you okay? I put it into a place of protecting myself and saying, I can't do this anymore. I keep reaching out. I'm getting nothing in return. And that was self-preservation for me, but it didn't support you at the same time.
It was hard. I think the first thing that really ran through my head was like, how could he think that that's like, why would I not talk to him? Why would I not be answering him? Like, I'm just busy. I just had a kid. Give me a break. I feel like it came a lot from being defensive on my own, right? Of being like, I'm not doing that. I just had a baby. I'm trying to figure this out. I don't know how to do all of this. I'm figuring out the balancing act. I'm so tired. All of that, right? I mean, there definitely is a part of it where I was angry also, because I think not really understanding what I was going through. I was also like, how dare you leave me in that moment, right? It's an interesting mix of emotions. And I think at the same time, the second wave of it for me was like, well, who's going to show up for Charlie? Who's going to be there for him? Who's going to make sure he's okay? Because even though I know you have a network of people and you have an amazing support system in your family, I always sort of felt like I was the friend that pushed you or called you on stuff that maybe others weren't. In that moment, my head just went into those two: protect myself, defend myself, and protect you, but not knowing how.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you were going to be okay. And I knew at the time, without you telling me, I knew you were struggling with things, and I didn't know if you'd be okay. I didn't know if you were going to make a scary choice. without someone there to check in and make sure you were okay, even though ironically I wasn't doing a very good job of that in the moment because I was in my own stuff.
Yeah. And I think when we've had these conversations, it's so hard because in that moment, you were struggling and I was concerned for you and did not have the communication skills or even awareness to facilitate that conversation. I just knew something had shifted. I think growing up, a slight change in communication or a slight change in language just was my signal, but I didn't know how to explain that to you.
Yeah.
And I think at the same time, you were also, as you said, concerned about me and how I was doing when we weren't talking about me struggling or possibly being depressed, which I was.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like we were mirroring each other
Yeah.
and not even realizing it, and both scared and angry for the same reasons.
Yeah.
But there was no communication about it. Like we could not have that conversation.
Yeah. And I think the way that we were both dealing is that we were just kind of ignoring our own stuff and focusing on someone else. And I think as a result, we weren't able to see our own moments that needed to be seen. And I think what's interesting is even in that moment of time where I was hurt and I was angry and I was trying to protect myself and I was sad. I remember talking to some of my other friends about it and saying, can you believe that he's not getting it? Like, I'm a first time mom, like, I'm figuring this out. Like, it's really hard. And not one of them, and my husband included in that, not one person in my bubble, my people, said anything like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe there is something going on. Are you not communicating with him? Nobody challenged me. Nobody. And I think that allowed me to live in my denial longer. You and I both present ourselves a certain way into the world where we present ourselves as really strong and I've got it. I don't need help. I don't need support. Don't worry about me. I'm not the one you need to worry about at all. When in reality, sometimes those are the people that need it the most.
Yeah.
And I think in those moments, we both needed it. We both knew the other needed it, but we didn't see it in ourselves because we weren't capable of that at the time.
Yeah. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first
1000%.
before you can help someone else.
Yep.
And it's interesting that you had talked to your friends and they, in supporting you, understood it. I mean, I can look back now and reflect and understand my approach was wrong. My language was wrong. Like there are so many other ways I could have had that conversation.
Sure.
But that's 5 years of therapy and understanding myself better, understanding you better, just communicating and relating to people differently.
Yeah.
We were both frustrated. And I don't think either of us knew what we were going to do. But once we had had that conversation, what were your thoughts at that point in time about the future of our friendship?
I didn't have like this is what's going to happen or I just know it'll be fine. But I remember in a conversation that I was having with one of my very close friends who knows you, I remember that conversation being eye-opening for me because she asked a very simple question of like, well, what if he reaches out? What if he says, hey, this didn't go the way I wanted it to, or hey, let's just figure it out. What would you do? And it's so funny because I think in a lot of other relationships in my world, I would have been like, oh, no, absolutely not. Dunzo. I'm not going to open myself back up for that. Nope. And I didn't say that. I was very simply just like, well, it's Charlie. And I think there's something about that you can't really bottle. It's just the way it is. And our friendship has always been easy. And so when it wasn't, for both of us, it was too hard to handle. It also, for me, was like, well, but it's Charlie. So I don't know, if he reaches out, we'll talk. What do you mean? It never really occurred to me as like, oh, well, I'm never going to talk to him again.
I don't think it was just you. I think there were a lot of friendships that this happened with.
Yeah.
And I had a lot to figure out. I had a lot to understand about myself, and I had a lot bottled up that I didn't know how to talk about and was also too scary for me to talk about.
Yeah.
And I remember a time when I was postgraduate, but in my MBA program. I remember you coming to Albany out of the blue. We had talked maybe on a Thursday, and you, in that conversation, just said, I'll see you this weekend. I'm coming tomorrow. We're going to hang out. We'll go shopping. We'll do something.
Yeah.
but I'm coming for the weekend. You had actually just moved back from North Carolina.
Yeah.
What prompted that in that moment for you to take that trip?
I don't know if I can actually put it into words other than I just knew something was wrong. It's funny because pretty much most of our friendship has been long distance. So it wasn't like we were going and getting dinners together all the time. We weren't hanging out all the time. We weren't seeing each other face to face. So a lot of our interactions were talking. And when I got on the phone with you that day, I just heard something different in your voice and something felt, I don't know, just off. It felt there was something in what you were saying that in the depths of my soul said, he's not okay. You need to get there. And the unfortunate thing is that I wasn't able to understand how to have a conversation with you in that moment, right? I didn't know how to say, are you okay, in the right way. So the only thing that I knew to do was to show up and just be there. And I knew that if you could see me, that I'm here, I care, I want you to be okay, I love you, that I hoped would be enough, because I didn't know what was really going on and I didn't know the right questions to ask. I didn't want to push you into a place that you weren't, right? Like, what if I was wrong? What if I was assuming something that wasn't real? And what if I had made all this stuff up in my head that I was so worried about? I just felt I had to be there. You had to see that you weren't alone, that I was there, I cared, and I wanted you to know that unequivocally. I mean, I think at one point we were sitting, like, going through your clothes in your closet, like reorganizing clothes in your closet. It wasn't even like this big trip of we were going to do something or going, like, it wasn't that. It was just being in the same place at the same time. Felt like for me, it was the only thing I could do that would show you I was there.
Yeah. And in that moment, you showed up when I really needed you. I was really struggling with a first relationship that ended in a way that was very confusing. I was not out to anyone. I just remember how much it meant that you showed up and were there. And it gave me enough to keep going and keep taking a step forward. And so I think back to something you said earlier where you said I could have asked the question that was harder. I was scared of your reaction. I think in that moment, what you did was needed, showing up. And there's no way to look back and say, like, whether I could have answered the question or would have blown it off or how I would have reacted. You went above and beyond. You drove 3 hours and showed up. And I couldn't be more thankful for that because I needed someone there that weekend. But when your body is telling you, like, I need to get there, what held you back from asking the hard question? Or what in that moment would be the advice you would give to someone who can see that a loved one is struggling?
The reason that it was hard for me is that I'm a person that is, I would say, not terribly emotional. I don't want to sound like I'm a cold fish, but I'm more stoic. I don't let a lot of people in. I don't like people to see my vulnerabilities. And as a result, I also have a hard time not necessarily understanding them, but knowing when to ask or what to ask, or when you see somebody having a difficult time. Because I think I'm very good at reading a situation and understanding someone's kind of where they're at in their emotion, but I'm not very good at then figuring out how I need to react or be there or challenge them in some cases. And I think over the years of my own journey and my own therapy and my own personal development and just understanding of that is I now realize that a lot of the stuff that we don't say is the stuff that's more important than anything else. And so in that moment, my straight up fear was that you were going to do something really scary. But what if I was wrong? And I think that's the piece that has really always stuck with me from that weekend. Because today, the advice that I would give is that even if I was wrong, I wish I had been brave enough and had enough faith in the relationship that we had, the trust and the honesty we've always shared, and the foundation that's been laid in our friendship, that even if I asked that question and was wrong, it would be okay. You might be upset. You might not be ready to hear it. You might have a reaction that I didn't want you to have. You might not understand why I was asking, right? There's so many things that could have happened. But at the base of it, if I had asked the question, the worst thing that would have happened would be that you were upset that I asked. And when I think about that versus the alternative, that's hard. Because if I didn't go there that weekend, I don't know what would have happened. And that's not saying that I'm, the savior or something, but I just worry. And I don't know what that would have looked like.
Yeah. And I don't know either. I think it was a gift that you showed up that weekend. It was really important to me in that moment that you were there. As we go back to where we did take a break in our friendship, what could you have heard when you were struggling? I knew you were struggling because our communication pattern had changed, where you weren't responding to texts that you normally would. What would it have been like if I said, Katie, since you've given birth, something has changed and the way we interact is completely different. Are you okay?
I don't know. And I think that's the part that makes it all sort of scary. And also, would that have pushed me into questioning myself earlier? I don't know. But I know that in that moment, I genuinely don't think I was ready to hear it and to address it. And I do believe, as cheesy as this sounds, that things happen for a reason and they happen when they're meant to happen. I think about that weekend when I came to Albany. I think about the times that I've called you and we've just had crazy conversations about what's happening in our worlds, but those moments have always been when we needed them. And I needed to get there in my own time. So even if you had said, what's going on, I don't know if I would have heard it. I don't know if I would have accepted it or really seen it. I don't know that I was able to do that just yet.
Yeah. I think that as I have gone through my journey, understanding self and being able to ask yourself the hard questions, it can come from both sides.
Absolutely.
In those moments, it could come from someone saying, are you okay? This is concerning to me. That may not result in something in that exact moment.
Absolutely.
And they may say, no, I'm fine, which honestly, I probably would have cried and been like, no, I'm fine. I got it out of my system.
Yeah.
But even without you asking the question, it stuck with me that something was seriously wrong because you showed up out of nowhere, like within 12 hours.
Yeah.
And so as you went on your journey after we stopped talking effectively about 5 years ago, what did that look like for you in terms of when you realized that something was off?
It took a long time, longer than I'd care to admit, really. But I think, again, that goes to the I wasn't ready. And my husband would say I'm stubborn. I don't think I really started to understand it until I started talking to a therapist when my daughter turned 2. I was having a lot of fears that I would never had before. I would never classify myself as someone who was afraid of things or worrying to a point of anxiety. Never. What I found in my postpartum journey was I was worried about things that I would say out loud and I'd be like, ooh, that sounds a little nuts. And it was things that actually were very real to me and scary to me. Things like worst case scenarios of I made my husband get a whole security system because I was afraid someone was going to break into our house and take our child. Like, these are not normal thoughts, right? These are things like I wouldn't go to a park by myself with her until she was much older and could really listen because I didn't know what if somebody took her and I didn't see her? What if she got hurt? What if she fell? What if, like, there were so many things that would just run through my head on a constant loop. When I finally went to the doctor was triggered by the best way I can describe it is I think I had a panic attack. I'm still not sure of that, but I think I did. My daughter was home sleeping. My husband was at work. And I just remember she was peacefully, like, sound asleep in her bed. Could not have been a more picture perfect, happy child in that moment. And I just had this overwhelming fear and felt like something was sitting on my chest, that something bad was going to happen to her. I knew that wasn't normal. And I knew in that moment, oh, you're not okay. And I guess this speaks a lot to like how I think of things in the world. I had to fix it. I have to figure out how to fix it, not how to deal with it, not how to cope with it, not to understand it. I need to fix it. And so my solution was, okay, I'll go to the doctor. I'll talk to them. It's probably nothing, but like that'll fix it. And instead, what it was the beginning of a conversation and understanding that I had pretty severe postpartum anxiety that for 2 years had gone undiagnosed, because they ask you a ton of questions after you have a kid of like, if you're okay. But a lot of those questions are aimed at postpartum depression and like self-harm or harming your child or things like that. And that wasn't my situation at all. And so I would answer those questions honestly, but they weren't addressing what was happening to me and what was happening in my brain. And so until I started to understand what that meant and really seeking treatment for that, which required, in my case, medication. And what's funny is I started that medication, was starting to feel better, and then was pregnant again with my son. And so I had to stop taking the medication. And then I had all these anxieties about, well, what's going to happen now? Is it going to get worse while I'm pregnant? It was just really scary. And so it wasn't until my son was born and I had finished my breastfeeding journey with him that I then was like, oh, okay, back to me. I need to figure me out, because I still didn't feel myself. I didn't feel like I had gotten back to, and not necessarily an old version of myself, because that's not it. Like I didn't want to go back to who I was before kids. That's not what it was. I just didn't feel right. I didn't feel comfortable. There was something wrong in my just day-to-day existence, felt off, and I needed to figure it out. And so that is really where I sort of think the journey began. Like I knew I was diagnosed, but I didn't really get the opportunity to do a whole lot about it other than like talk therapy, which was helpful. But when you're talking about, for me, a chemical imbalance, talk therapy is only so helpful without medical intervention. It was a tough journey to get there and to get to today, where I feel the best version of myself than I ever have.
Yeah, it's amazing the journey that you went on, because just having gone through my own depression and anxiety, getting pregnant as you're starting to realize you have a problem and you're getting treatment, and then not being able to necessarily get the treatment you needed until after you stopped breastfeeding your son.
It was hard. I think that as a parent, you have this goal of wanting to be around, wanting to be the best version of yourself, wanting to set a great example for your kids, right? And I think to do that, sometimes you have to peel the layers back and figure out, where are you lacking, or where are your weaknesses, where are your strengths, where are your areas of development that you could really focus in on. And so I think as a parent, I really wanted that. I wanted to be able to lean into that and say, okay, use this as an opportunity, better understand yourself so that you can show your kids how to better manage themselves, how to be more secure within what their feelings are. Because I think growing up for me, my parents, we didn't really talk a lot about feelings. And I think there's a difference generationally of millennial parents. We're very focused on that. We're focused on how people feel. We're focused on mental health. We're focused on these things that my parents, we didn't talk about that at all. Doctors weren't evaluating kids at 4 and 5 years old to see how they were doing. Like that wasn't a thing. And so I think not having the same tools available to me is something that I'm now like acutely aware of. And so being able to say, yes, this journey's for me, right? I want to be the best version of myself. I want to feel as well as I could be is absolutely the goal and the main priority. But the secondary benefit is, how do I translate that into what I want my kids to be able to access, that I've had to work to find out or work to understand about myself? What do I want them to just intrinsically know about, if you feel this, that's okay. Here's how we're going to deal with it. Here's how we're going to work together. Here's what you need to know about it. And I feel like that's just tools that we didn't have. We didn't have access to. I certainly didn't. And I think my parents did the absolute best they could with what they knew. And they were in many ways really progressive and ahead of the times in lots of things. But this is just one of those areas that I don't think until recently we've really started to not just understand, but really see in a bigger way and see the impact. And so for me, it was actively choosing that I needed to come first so that I could be the best version of myself for them and help them become the best versions of themselves.
I love that. And I think it's so true that there's a completely different conversation today around both parents' mental health and kids' mental health.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that something's wrong.
Nope.
It just means that there's something that's hard that we have to talk about.
And I think there's a lot of that we just never did. To your point, nothing was wrong. Nothing
Yeah.
was bad. I had a wonderful childhood, right? But like at the end of the day, we know so much more today than we did then.
Yeah.
And I think we all would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't try to broaden our understanding of it so that we can be better humans, you know, not just for ourselves, but for everybody.
I couldn't have said it better. And I think what's interesting about what you just said is that we reconnected before you really started your journey after you gave birth to your son. And I sent you a text out of the blue that just said, "Happy birthday." And you must have responded, "Thank you."
Yeah.
And I picked up the phone and just called you immediately because you responded. What was that like?
It was weird, but great. It was weird only because it had been a good amount of time that we hadn't spoken.
Yeah.
At the same time, I can viscerally feel, I remember the relief that I felt. There was that, okay, we're moving forward. And kind of to what we were saying earlier, it was almost like we just picked right back up of just talking about what was happening. There wasn't this big moment of, you know, let's hash it out, let's digest this, let's like figure out what went wrong. There wasn't any of that. It was just, how are you? What's happening? What's going on? And so much had been happening in both of our worlds that we had all these things to catch up on and talk about. And it was very much we just picked right back up. And it was slow. Like, I don't want to make it sound like we were suddenly talking every day. We weren't. But it was slow. But I think it's how we both felt safe to start. And we needed to figure that out before anything else.
Absolutely. And I think neither of us really knew what to say, because I think at that point in our journey, us reconnecting was us realizing something was wrong, and we started working on ourselves, but we couldn't articulate it necessarily yet.
Totally.
And there was never an "I'm sorry." What do you make of that?
I don't think we needed it. And I know that that sounds kind of silly, but I don't think neither one of us did anything wrong. Neither one of us did something that we owed the other one an apology. And I think at the core of it, our friendship, our foundation has always come from a place of, I would say, like mutual respect, but more importantly, love. Like, we just love each other, period. And for me, there wasn't anything to forgive. There wasn't anything there that needed to be uncovered or digested in a way that needed that. I didn't need to hear from you, "I'm sorry." And I didn't think you needed to hear that from me. What I thought was more important was that I needed you to know how I was. And that's where we landed.
Yeah.
We landed on, well, how are you? What's happening? And that was ultimately, like, if you really think about it, when we had that pause, we both weren't okay. And so all we needed in that moment, and especially like starting back up again, all we needed to know was the other was okay.
Yeah.
And I really think that's it.
It's interesting because in the same moment, we were both hurt. We both felt not seen, not cared for. Like, the other one was struggling. We were scared. It's a lot. And we really did just pick up and start talking about what was going on. And I could tell something had shifted and was different, and that it wasn't where we are today with several more years of therapy, but it was a step in the right direction. I definitely remember feeling the relief that, okay, we can move forward and we're going to figure this out. And even if we didn't know how to communicate it, we understood it. If you think about everything that we've talked about today and getting to the point where we've reconnected, we talked deeply about feelings and perspectives and all of these things, what message from all of this do you want to leave people with today?
I think the biggest thing is that it's and I think this is true in so many aspects, but I think at the end of the day, with friendships, with relationships of any kind, if they are really founded on love, genuine wanting and in some ways needing to know that the other one is okay, is a part of that dynamic. It's intrinsically woven into who we are as humans. We want to connect, we want to be there for other people. And I think that for me, the message is, if you think someone's not okay, ask. Because I think at the end of it all, I choose to believe that things happen for a reason, and I choose to believe that they happen when they're meant to. But I also choose to believe that there are so many different paths that could be taken. And one question, one hug, one phone call can, in many ways, make the difference for someone if your gut, your core, is saying something's wrong. It's okay to be wrong in that. But for me, I think I will never go forward in my life, in my relationships, without asking the hard questions, because I now know the alternative to asking that hard question, the alternative to understanding that they are in fact okay or they are not okay, is really a much harder truth than something I would want to live with, knowing I could have tried to do something. It doesn't mean that I can change the outcome. I'm not responsible for other people's behavior and choices, right? But you as a person have to live with the actions you take. And if I could change anything from that trip to Albany, it would be having the courage and faith in our friendship to know that it was going to be okay that I ask you the hard question, no matter what. Whether that meant that I was staying there for a lot longer than I intended, whether that meant that you were actually fine and going to be pissed at me, whatever it might have been, I wish I had had the courage to ask it and to know that in any situation we could have seen it through, because love is there as the baseline.
When you said, like, if I asked the hard question and I needed to stay there a lot longer, like, that hit really hard. I got chills, because in that moment, the sense of relief that I have today, knowing that if I needed you back then to stay a week or a month, like, that you would have, gives me in some ways more closure than some of the conversations that we've had, because it's just a new level of understanding, like, how far you would go in our friendship to make sure that I was okay.
I think the thing that a lot of people tend to lean away from is that no one's perfect. No one knows what the road is going to look like. No one knows what you're carrying, but we are not meant to be people that are on an island by ourselves. We're meant to have people around us. We're meant to have a community. We're meant to have a family. And for me, I have a very small family, which is why I've chosen to marry into a huge family, and why I've chosen to surround myself with these friendships that they're my family. They're my chosen family. I think that's the thing that today so much is about quick, right? Like, how fast can I get it? I need that answer. I need this delivered. I need that, like, whatever it is. And I guess I'm old school. I just would rather show up. I would rather be there, whether that's on the phone, whether that's a video call, whether that's in person, it doesn't matter. But it's the humanity of it all for me that I think we just need more of. Because we're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to be figuring it out by ourselves. We're meant to figure it out with each other.
I mean, that's what society is about. It's about community. And I think sharing these ideas and stories of connection is so important. And I am so thankful that you were open to sharing these topics today, because they're not easy to talk about. And I appreciate the vulnerability that you came to this conversation with, because even for me, I learned something today that I didn't know before. I'm not going to cry again. But it's just continuing to share, and it deepens the relationships and the connections. With the final question that I ask in interviews, What is something that someone has told you that's impacted your life and you'll never forget?
So I love this one. And it was told to me like eons ago at this point, but it didn't hit me until a few years ago. Like, when you have those memories that just like vividly come into your mind, it's just because you are the main character in your story doesn't mean that your role as supporting character in someone else's story isn't equally as important, even if only for a moment of time.
I love that.
I love it because I think we often focus on ourselves, which of course is human nature. But I don't know, the older I get, the more I realize that if you choose to be, you can be so embedded in others' lives and them in yours. And sometimes it's not about you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about the other person, and sometimes it's about that journey together. And sometimes you're in the front seat, sometimes you're in the back seat. And I kind of like that. I like that everybody has an opportunity to shine in different times, even if it's not your story.
I think that's the most important part, that it's for a time and it's mutual. It has to be reciprocated on both sides, and I think that's why, as we look back, there was no I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
because we knew at the core of it where we stood, and we just wanted to make sure we were, not we were, but that each other together, we, the royal we, were okay.
Yeah.
Katie, thank you. Really, thank
You're
you for
welcome.
joining today.
Thanks for having me.